Hello, I'm Earl Weinberg, and this is Book Circle Presents The Cavalry Cycle. This time we're going to continue our reading of 30 Toes Short. It was as if a fine tingling mist had been sprayed in his eyes and a spicy smell invaded his nose, then faded. This was an enchantment shop. It was organized something like a small jewelry store. Shelves and displays were full of trinkets and little bottles. The place was not usually full of soldier horse, but as Buckjack reflected, that's what agility classes had been for. A plump lady had been gossiping with a short, wiry man behind the counter who was probably the hedge wizard responsible for a large fraction of the charms here. They looked up, of course. He smiled briefly and tipped his hat. "You're a monster," Fletcher said at the back of his head. "Make sure you're a polite one." "Can I help you?" asked the probable mage. "Yes, Buckjack glanced out the window. Carlin was still there, looking down the street. He surveyed the store. He was distracted. Despite what he had said, he really wanted Carlin to stay while he still had some kind of social upper hand on him. You are sailing on the Bethos?" the woman inquired. Buckjack nodded, still scanning. "Ah," said the shopkeeper. "Looking to make the voyage a little more comfortable?" Buckjack was young and in a rush. The shopkeeper correctly inferred he was a trainee, but incorrectly inferred he was nervous about sailing. "What'll it be, seasick drops?" He pointed to some shelves behind the woman. "By themselves or with something mundane, both very effective." "Pauvre garçon," the woman remarked. "What kind of dosage would he need?" She looked him up and down and then along. "You must weigh half a ton, mon petit." "About that, madame," Buckjack admitted, "but I don't get seasick, at least not with his human stomach." He didn't know about the equine one yet. "Do you have—" "Well, good," said the shopkeeper. "I must admit I hadn't considered the dosage. Yes, probably need to chug the whole bottle. Now, dosage doesn't apply to these." He indicated a big glass jar at his elbow, full of knotted bits of rope. Buckjack recognized them. Each held a few minutes' breeze. "These are reloadable, if you can push the vis or know someone who can. Some people—" Buckjack waited for a pause. He felt his resolve melting away. There were awkward implications to the purchase he was intending. He checked the window again. Carlin was talking to a figure that he mostly eclipsed. "I'm not saying these are for sailing, though I have known sailors to use a few to get a small boat going in a calm. No, of course, you have military-grade stuff for that. But below decks, however clean the ship, it can get smelly and hot, and then—" These must be his personal specialty, Buckjack decided. To hell with the awkwardness factor. "Your business is your own," his father said of such situations. He did not have to explain. "Pardon me, sir. I just came in for a ward, something for privacy against scrying." "Ah," said the shop mage knowingly. "To be sure, there's little enough privacy aboard, especially for you big fellas. Certainly, right here." And he pointed to a little stand half behind a stack of books bearing amulets on chains. Each amulet was a coin-sized white disc bearing a blue spot with a black dot in the center, a very standardized design. "Thank you, sir," said Buckjack, leaning over the lady and plucking one up. Don't step when you can reach, an indoor agility rule. "Who is the maker?" He had to look that up. Buckjack took another glance out the window. Carlin was still talking to the person in eclipse. The one-quarter profile he presented showed he was smiling. The maker was a reputable name. Buckjack paid, tipped his hat again, and backed out. Out on the street, he found Carlin still talking to the new acquaintance. She was a slim young blonde, in complete flapper gear of the 1920s, down to a tubular blue dress, matching cloche hat, a rope of pearls, and bobbed hair. She turned bright eyes and smile on Buckjack. He smiled back and saluted. Carlin swept his hand toward his friend and said, "Mademoiselle Petra Vincent, let me introduce Cavalryman John Weldon." She extended her hand. Buckjack took it. It was dry and cool and very, very light. 1905 to 1978, she said graciously, confirming his guess. Yet she had not set off the ghost sensitivity that he, like most Grand Normans, had. "Therefore," he said, Return and we return, bowing down over her hand. Keep faith and so do we, she answered. So, a dead woman who was now a fae. She turned back to Carlin. I will return when I can. It all depends on his moods, you know. Carlin nodded and thanked her. Not at all. People in my position, we look for occupation. She turned away, distributing a smile between both of them. À bientôt, mes jolis poulains. Buckjack blinked. It was the first time anyone had ever called him my pretty colt, even if he had to share it with Carlin. Carlin glanced at the grin on Buckjack's face. Whoa, boy, she's 4 or 5 generations older than you, and, dead. Buckjack kept up the smile. Just let me savor the moment, mon joli poulain. The moment duly savored, he asked, What was that about? Working on a deal, Carlin replied. What kind of deal? The kind I'm not ready to talk about yet. You go on. I'll see you back at the caravansary. And he turned and trotted back across the road to the docks. Buckjack sighed and decided that his best chance for a peaceful life lay in going back to the caravansary and having more breakfast. But he was only halfway there when he heard a familiar rapid rhythm of hooves and, turning, saw Carlin catching him up. Deal successful? He asked, since Carlin was smiling above his habitual level. Still working on it. So what were you working on? This. He dangled the amulet before Carlin. Now, as I was saying, you're steaming and fuming about forced transformation because meeting Harry rubbed salt in your own wounds, but you're afraid to talk about it because of some coerced bond. Well, here, now you can talk. Carlin looked doubtful and did not take the amulet. Buckjack took it back into his palm and started walking. Coerced. Not even a proper oath. Is it? Did you actually agree to anything? What did you say? Notice I'm not asking to whom. In a subdued voice, Carlin answered, I didn't say anything, except he asked, do you understand? And I said, yes. So you never promised to keep a secret? And this whole thing is coerced. You don't think there's any justice to this, do you? Carlin scowled and shook his head. Right. And you've had a year. You could have absolved yourself 7 ways from Sunday. Maybe you have, but you don't know. So, are there penalties in this geas? I doubt it. It's so sloppy. Carlin shook his head microscopically. He was staring at the road as they walked, looking worried. It's a plain old threat, isn't it? Buckjack concluded. Some guy leaned on you, told you, go enlist and keep quiet or I'll make you regret it, right? Basically, Carlin whispered. Buckjack paced thoughtfully next to Carlin. He'd sparred with Carlin in martial arts, played rigorous war games with and against him, knew him to be perfectly adequate in archery and guns, and had had a year to decide that the confident prancing was not a pose, well, not just a pose. Carlin was not timid, but this foe had him spooked. Did Buckjack really want to get involved in Carlin's troubles if they were this bad? It was not quite too late to back away gracefully. Or it might be, but one could still back and grace be damned. But no. To back out now would be cowardly, faithless, and would mean all his needling had been to no purpose. Carlin's hinting showed he wanted to unburden himself, and Buckjack had volunteered to help him through the fear. Maybe out of nosiness as much as compassion, but he had. Back to the fray. Look, there's no built-in penalties. All that's left is the geas will notify him if you talk. If it even does that. If it's even still there. And this ward will jam the notification. It's a good ward. He offered the amulet again, but still Carlin didn't take it. Come on, bro. It's a shoddy geas, probably scrubbed by now. He's at least a world away, and you have a ward. And what if that's not enough, bro, and he comes hunting? Buckjack decided not to try bro again, but still smiled. Then the cavalry will ride to your rescue. We're your classmates, your brothers in transformation, and big ol' herd animals. Look at you. 2 years ago, you were a man simple whose only interest in horses was betting on them, if that. Now you're as much horse as man and will be from here on. And you did not want to be. And you've had over a year to chew on that fact, but told no one. Tell now. I swear by St. Martin the Horseman and St. John Revelator that I will not pass this on without your permission. He felt a little tension in his head, telling him the oath had taken. Soon it would fade into the background, but it would come to the fore again if he started to break it. Carlin, as oath holder, felt it too. Forget it. No deal. Ego te absolvo. Just keep quiet. I'm just as unhappy about people getting snarled up in oaths as I am about forced transformations. The little tension relaxed. Okay, I just promise. Thanks. A few silent paces. What's John Revelator got to do with it? Who's he? He's my name-saint, is all. The guy who wrote Revelation, probably the same as John Evangelist. You're stalling. Buckjack offered his open hand to Carlin, the amulet lying in it. Carlin took it and looked around. They were nearing the caravansary. He turned at the next corner and started a wandering course through a little commercial area. They were out in the open and so hard to tail. They were moving and so no one could overhear much. Sundered folk in the unsundered world used this trick often. Now Carlin used it here. He hung the amulet around his neck and began. So, I used to be an expediter back in London. Buckjack nodded. This much Carlin had already told them. Expediter sounded much better than errand runner, and it did mean an errand runner who was often given high levels of initiative and discretion. That certainly meant deal-making, and they had all seen that in action as he arranged trades of favors to get apparently unavailable minor goods for his classmates. It seemed shifty to some of the others, but no one had any complaints about his deals. Buckjack was a trader's son and saw that Carlin was working himself up into the trading profession from street level, or had been. Then it had looked like fun to join the cavalry, get transformed, and probably never see London again. Right. I worked the whole dock area, knew the area as well as a cabbie, and knew lots of the deals and networks going on, Mond Minor or Major. I won't say all. No one knows them all. No one mortal. There was this guy. You heard about him only occasionally and saw him even less. Sundered London is full of guys like that, but this one was a lot showier than most. He's called the Cloud Rider. He dresses all in gray, regular clothes in different tones of gray, so it's not screaming obvious or anything, and gray hair and gray eyes, doing the quiet menace pose, you know. I never spoke to him, only saw him a handful of times before he got me. And the rumor was that he rode a gray horse, but it was just a rumor. I didn't believe it. I never saw him on any horse, and they said it was his major magic. He could summon it and make it disappear, they said, and it was totally silent and sometimes translucent and jumped so far it was basically flying and like that. But you know, the sundering is wicked high in big cities. Never mind that magic like that is way too expensive to be common. Anyone who tried anything that flashy in a big city would either be an ignorant idiot who'd get smacked down by the third try, or so powerful and so skilled at sunder dodging that, well, that they'd be hard to believe in. I figured the Cloud Rider himself put the rumor around to up the menace factor and generally muddy the waters. In fact, I didn't even have to figure it. That was the counter rumor. What did he do? Not much. That's why you only heard about him occasionally. Every few months he brought some goods in, nothing large, something you could fit in your pocket, and he'd pass it on to someone who'd start an anonymous chain of moves to his customer. He must have got paid through some other channel, because no one heard of him demanding payment of or from anyone, or anyone hunting him down to pay him. And sometimes, the rumors said, he'd be seen riding his gray horse out of town in the night, headed south. But never seen coming from the south, or arriving at all. He'd just show up. Very modest. Hardly worth putting on a big spooky silent menace act for. Why not, just lay low and do your business in peace? Well, I figured it out too late. It was no act. He is a big spooky menace. Just doing what came naturally. And yes, good enough at it that he could dodge the sundering without raising a sweat. So I come into it when one day one of my contacts, Nell, tells me a client wants to meet me. She looked scared, so I asked her what was wrong, but she said, "I can't tell you," with that emphasis that lets you know they are oath-bound. Then she tells me the meetup is at a coffee shop we both know, one where it's just sundered after 11 or so. But it's a gig, and the pay is good, and you don't stay in business getting a reputation for too much caution. So I go, and I wait, and boom, the guy sits down opposite me, and it's the Cloud Rider. I'm careful to be very polite, of course, and so is he. He's not a native English speaker, sort of an East European accent. He hands me a little package about the size of a paperback book and says he wants it at a place in Greenwich in an hour. And he apologizes for the short notice, but it's very important. Well, that's kind of fishy, because if he's been wanting to meet me for hours, why didn't he meet me sooner to give me more time? But there could be reasons, so I accept, and he says, brisk and casual, "Your word?" So I say, "I swear by my name that I will do my best to make this delivery for you." It's what I always say. Said. No deal with the devil, just businesslike. And he seems satisfied, so I take the package and start. I know an express cab service, but they only have certain pickup points. I call ahead and make for the pickup. I get there, but no cab. I wait a little and start making alternate plans, and as I'm peering around, hoping, two guys step out of the shadows, and one says he had a flat. This one is Vento, and his partner is called Paster, two sundered toughs like 100 others in town. They have no grudge with me, I only know the names and faces, so they were hired. I don't think that until a couple of blocks later, after I start running. They are not unskilled. We can assume they're good with fist and kosh and maybe a little karate, maybe guns, but they are also good at herding, chivying, driving. You see, the express cab people aren't idiots. Their pickup points are in open, well-lighted parts of town. It was after 1 a.m., but there's still a few people around. These people, however, do not want to get involved with two guys chasing a third. They chase and they chivvy, and soon I'm in bad, lonely little alleys that I would not have chosen to go in, but they didn't let me have that choice. Finally, they get me in a dead end, and they pull knives and come at me. I yell, "What do you want? Just tell me," over and over in different ways, but they never answer. So what they want is me dead. I'm making my mind to go low, trying to scoot out at knee level, when I see him, the Cloud Rider, riding. His horse is solid gray, and it is silent, and it is translucent. The rider draws a curved sword, a cavalry saber. Then he clears his throat. The guys look over their shoulders and gasp. I'd already gasped, that hadn't distracted them. He charges. I curl up in a ball. I hear one yell and one gasp, and then, after a bit, a thudding, punching noise. "Get up," the rider says. I get up, and Vento and Paster are lying dead at my feet. Distinctly dead. The rider is standing over Paster, cleaning his saber with a handkerchief, and Paster's throat is cut. Vento is lying there staring with a big hoof-shaped dent in his forehead, and the horse is trampling him. Only it doesn't seem to do much harm. But a fog is rising out of the body, and then I see it forming into arms and head, the ghost trying to fend off the trampling. Then the horse reaches into the fog with its teeth and pulls, and the fog is gone, and the horse has a foal by the neck, a foal even mistier, paler than it is, and the foal yells. It's a human voice, not horse, but it can't form words, like a man in a nightmare. Then the horse throws it to the ground. I suppose the smart thing would have been for Vento to have run off through a wall or demanifested or something, if running around London as a ghost colt is your idea of an afterlife. But he was too stunned. He just stood there, staggering and shaking his head. The rider watches this with mild interest. Then he looks over Paster's body, but nothing happens. He shrugs and says, "Someone else has a prior claim, I suppose." Then he turns to me. "You failed your charge," he says, "but more, you owe me your life. For you I killed those two. You owe me. Now listen, Grand Norman. To repay me, you will enlist in your dedicated cavalry. You will make the pact tomorrow, and as soon as you can, you will submit yourself to be sworn in and changed. And you will say nothing of me. Do you understand?" And I said, "Yes." He says, "If you disobey, I will know." And then he smiles and says, "After all, you will only be half changed, and you will be alive." He sheaths the saber and turns away, but I feel the geas on me. Then he pulls a canteen off his belt and opens and whistles to the horse. It turns into mist and dives into the canteen. I didn't see the ghost foal. I think Vento got pulled in too. Then he ignores me completely and saunters out of the alley, leaving me there with two corpses. That was in April of last year. I had all of May to wait through before standing up for Fletcher to shoot me, thinking about it. And yeah, it was a shoddy geas, but it was a real good threat. So here I am. I obeyed, and I'm half changed, but still alive, like he said. But why? What was all that rigmarole about? He set it all up. It's as clear as day. I asked around while I was still in London, still two-legged. I can't prove that he hired Vento and Paster, but no one else had, for all I could tell. So he sets them on me and then kills them, either to push the geas or just to show he means business. I'm guessing the first. Just to get me in the cavalry? Why? I was nothing to him. You can bet I've stewed over that one. So maybe we were sacrifices or something, to something horsey, the way maybe Harry and his mates were sacrificed to something fishy or watery. Whatever it is, it gets Paster's blood. Vento is a horse ghost slave, and me is me dedicated to something horsey, like it says in the cavalry's name. Or maybe he's just a bully with a horse kink and bloodlust. That would fit the facts too. Carlin sighed. But now I've disobeyed him and told. God in heaven, does that feel good? A little scary, but good. So thanks. Thank you, John. Not Weldon, not Buckjack, not even Jack, just John. Are you crying? Martin's cloak, stop it. Blushing and crying, you are a mood ring on hooves. Smoke in my eyes. Someone's breakfast bacon. Sure. Hey, it's as plausible as joining the cavalry just for fun. He changed the subject. I never heard you swear by Martin's cloak before. Usually it's been his jodhpurs or his polo mallet or something. I felt a little more serious. St. Martin of Tours was patron of horses and their riders, so surely he would take the dedicated cavalry too. His first conspicuous saintly act had been cutting his cloak in half to share with a naked beggar. I am so sorry, mes frères, and so angry for you. Mes frères was Chanelais, not an English ornament like bro. It just slipped out, but was not rebuffed. I don't need pity. I came out of it with some good loot. Look at me, strong and tough and the fastest thing on four legs in either cavalry. Great salary, great prospects. Rant died down to growl. Great need for justice, Buckjack added. Carlin looked back down the street. We better get back to the caravansary. He straightened one back, then the other, and lifted his tail. There was an unwanted note of determination in the prance, but the prance was on. Showtime. The caravansary filled up with people from both cavalries. It was time to move horses. They'd been housed in stables all over the area, but now they were to be gathered in one corral and then loaded aboard the Bethos. Captain Fletcher collected his trainees and led them past the corral, then to the livery stable where their horses had stayed the night. He handed the paperwork to the hostler, gestured at the stalls, and said to his class, "Have at it, gentlemen." Then he stood back to see how they would do. He had brought a passenger who was not so detached. Eowick leapt from the saddlecloth on Fletcher's back to the captain's shoulder. Fletcher had a hand up and ready, but the Brownie successfully planted the landing. He still looked pale, as predicted, and wobbled a bit. "Hold it! I want to check their condition." He hopped from one shoulder to another, or clambered along the bars of stall windows, ostentatiously reluctant to touch the floor. The hostler looked sour. He had known what he would be up against, and the floor was as clean as trodden concrete gets. The Brownie opened fire, and he returned it. "Have these lights been on all night?" "Certainly not, sir." "Look at that bedding." "Looks like a horse sat on it, sir." "These two shouldn't be together." "They wanted it, sir." "I know what they wanted. They'll tease each other all night and wear themselves out." "Don't see how I could have known that. It looked fresh enough to me." "There's no water in this one." "Watered them half an hour ago." "Well, give him some more. It's hot, you know." "If you like, but there's such a thing as too much water, and he's had 3 pails this morning." "3?" And so on. The horses had paid no attention to any of this and were variously zoning out or soliciting petting from the trainees or shifting about restlessly, hoping to be out and about soon. After the first few exchanges, Fletcher paid no attention either and waved to his lads to get on with it. Buckjack opened the nearest stall and slid a halter on Pewter. She was a dainty gray and a trainee like him. That is, this was her first expedition, too. She had been stalled with Nuck, an old hand at expeditions, whose blasé attitude would calm her. She was prey to mixed emotions now, though. It was all very exciting and a little scary, and what was going to happen next? He placed a firm hand on her withers, and though he held her head, did not need it, but just escorted her out into the corridor when the way was clear. Nuck followed, having already worked his muzzle into his halter and lifted the halter off its hook. Buckjack buckled it for him, meantime blocking Pewter's path with his flank, which she actually took for a reassuring hug-like gesture. Nothing had made Buckjack realize so keenly that he was as much horse as man, transformed in mind as well as body, as his new connection to horses. From the first day, he could read their faces and postures as readily as those of humans. He did not know if it was the transformation or the example and training from Fletcher and Sanders that had led him on to care about them, but he did now. There was still a gap to reach across, but it no longer felt like the gap between human and beast. Rather, it felt like the gap between adult and child. "Okay, girl, settle down." No, not in front of everyone. "Come on, you little floozy, down to business." That was Carlin coping with Lacey, who was an incorrigible flirt. She was nuzzling him in the chest and trying to lip his ear. Carlin gave her lead a sharp tug down with one hand, his other holding the lead for Henny, who gazed her disdain at Lacey. "Another one like that and it's a cold shower for you, kid," he told her. "For both of us," he added in an undertone, because as every male equine in the stable knew, Lacey smelled delicious just now. Again. "Something wrong with that girl," opined Fells, who was working past Carlin with his own pair of horses. "Seems like she goes boy crazy every other week." Eowick hopped onto Fell's back, looking more recovered, and pronounced, "Just needs to be bred." Carlin found all eyes momentarily on Lacey, and therefore on him. "Well, don't look at me," he said, getting a round of guffaws. He clicked to Lacey, "Come on, cousin. A brisk walk in some fresh air. Clear your head." And we'll follow Carlin and the horses and Buckjack further next time.